The Belgian Malinois hit the cage so hard the entire emergency bay shook. 83 pounds of muscle, scars, and fury, and for one long second, nobody in that ER moved. Security officer Dale Pruitt dropped his clipboard. A triage nurse knocked over a full cup of coffee and didn't bother looking down. Dr. Marcus Holt, chief of emergency medicine at Northridge Medical Center, took 3 steps backward and put a gurney between himself and the animal. The dog's eyes were pale, almost white, and it was looking at every single person in that room like it was calculating something. Then it hit the cage again. "Get that thing out of my ER," Dr. Holt said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "And somebody call animal control, now." In the back corner, near the supply cabinet, Emily Carter set down the saline drip she'd been prepping and looked at the cage. She didn't move toward it, not yet. She just looked. If you've ever been in a room full of people who are completely wrong about something, and you're the only one who knows it, stay with me. Like this video, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and follow along to the end. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. But Northridge Medical Center sat on the edge of Blackwater City like a building that had survived too many budget cuts and not enough renovations. The ER handled about 200 patients on a slow day. On a busy one, the hallways smelled like antiseptic and desperation in equal measure, and the staff moved with the kind of efficiency that looked calm from the outside and felt like controlled panic from the inside. Emily Carter had worked there for 3 years. She was 31, and she had the kind of face that people forgot in a crowd. Not because she wasn't worth remembering, but because she didn't push for attention. She did her job, she did it well, and when she clocked out at the end of a shift, she went home to a second-floor apartment where she kept exactly 2 things on the kitchen counter: a coffee maker and a well-worn paperback with a broken spine. Most of her colleagues knew almost nothing about her. They knew she was reliable. They knew she had a background in military healthcare. She'd mentioned it once, vaguely, during an orientation session her second week on the floor, but nobody had thought to ask follow-up questions. She hadn't encouraged them to. What they didn't know was that for 4 years before Northridge, Emily Carter had worked as a combat medic embedded with special operations units in 3 different countries. She had treated injuries that most emergency physicians at this hospital would never see in a lifetime of practice. She had worked in conditions where there was no backup, no equipment, and no margin for the kind of hesitation she was watching Dr. Holt perform right now. She'd also treated military working dogs. Not often, but enough. The animal in the cage had been brought in by a man named Terry Bowles, a private security contractor who operated a training facility 40 minutes outside of Blackwater City. Bowles had called Northridge directly, not animal control, not a veterinary clinic, but the hospital, claiming the dog had attacked one of his handlers and needed to be sedated before anyone else got hurt. He'd loaded it into a transport cage, driven it to the ER entrance, handed the cage over to 2 security guards who clearly hadn't been briefed on what they were receiving, and then said he'd be right back. That was 40 minutes ago. Nobody had heard from Terry Bowles since. The dog, no ID tag, no microchip information on file, no documentation of any kind, had been sitting in the cage in ER Bay 4 since then, escalating. It had gone from low growling to full aggression, and twice it had thrown its entire body weight at the cage door with enough force to rattle the hinges. A bite sleeve that Bowles had left in the back of the transport was now in 3 pieces on the floor of the cage. The animal had done that quietly, sometime during the first 15 minutes, before anyone noticed. Dale Pruitt, head of hospital security, and a man who prided himself on having handled every kind of situation that came through those doors, was now standing 8 feet back from the cage with his radio in one hand and a tranquilizer syringe in the other. He'd called animal control. Animal control had called the Blackwater City Police Department. The BCPD had sent 1 officer who took 1 look at the dog and said the word euthanize before anyone had asked for his opinion. Dr. Holt heard that word and latched onto it like a life preserver. "That's the call," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "We document it, we have the animal put down, and we get this bay cleared. We've got a full waiting room, and I am not running an ER with that thing in it." "Sir," a junior resident, a young man named Elliot, who'd been on shift for 16 hours and still looked like he was trying to say the right thing. "Sir, We don't actually have authority to order euthanasia. That would have to go through animal control or... I'm not asking for a legal seminar, Elliot. No, I know, but if the animal belongs to someone, there's no ID, no chip, no owner on record. Holt gestured toward the cage with a kind of controlled impatience. That animal has already demonstrated it's a danger to staff, my staff, in my ER. I'll take the liability. The dog hit the cage again. 2 nurses backed away. The officer put his hand on his radio. Dale Pruitt uncapped the syringe. Don't touch him. It wasn't loud. Emily Carter said it the same way she said most things, evenly, without inflection, like she was reading something off a chart. But something about the flatness of it cut through the noise. Everyone turned. Emily was still standing near the supply cabinet. She hadn't moved toward the cage. She was just looking at the animal with an expression that nobody in the room could quite read. Not fear, not excitement, more like recognition. Excuse me? Holt turned to face her fully, and when he did, he had the look of a man who was absolutely certain he was about to deal with something tedious. Did you say something, Carter? I said don't touch him. She met his eyes. Not yet. Silence. Dale Pruitt looked at Holt. Holt looked at Emily. The dog in the cage had gone still. Not calm, but watchful. Its pale eyes tracked the room. Carter, Holt said carefully, you are an ER nurse. That, he pointed toward the cage, is a dangerous, unidentified animal in my emergency department. I appreciate the input, but this is not a situation that requires your involvement. It's not aggression, she said. That's not what this is. I'm sorry? The way he's moving, the way he's hitting the cage. He's not attacking. He's performing a threat display. There's a difference. She glanced at Pruitt and the syringe. If you sedate him wrong, you could kill him. And if you go near that cage right now with that posture, you're going to get bit. Pruitt looked at his own posture and then looked back at her. I've handled dogs before. Not this kind. The room went awkward. Holt rubbed the back of his neck. It was the kind of moment where someone needed to either laugh it off or push back hard, and Holt chose the second option because the first one would have required him to feel something. Carter, you are a nurse, an ER nurse. A good one. I've got no issue with your work, but this is not within your scope, and I'm going to ask you to step back and let the people handling this situation handle it. Understood? Emily looked at him for a moment, then she looked at the dog. His right rear leg, she said. Look at it. Nobody moved. Look at the leg, she said again. Pruitt squinted toward the cage. The dog had shifted slightly, and the positioning of the cage now put its rear quarter at an angle that, if you actually stopped and looked, showed something. A scar. Old, healed, but significant. A long surgical line running from hip to mid-femur. The kind of precise scar that didn't come from a dogfight or an accident. The kind that came from a field surgeon who knew what they were doing. That's a medical procedure scar, Emily said. Professional work. Someone with training did that. That's not a fighting dog, and it's not a stray. That animal has been in somebody's care. She paused. Or it was. Another silence. Different quality this time. That doesn't change anything, Holt said. But he said it quieter. It changes everything. Emily finally moved. Not toward the cage, but toward Holt. She stopped about 4 feet away and kept her voice down. I need 10 minutes, just 10 minutes before anyone puts a syringe anywhere near that animal. Holt stared at her. Why? She didn't answer immediately. For a moment she looked like she was deciding something, weighing it, measuring it against some internal scale. Because I think I've seen this before, she said, and if I'm right, destroying this dog would be a very serious mistake. Holt gave her 5 minutes. He made a point of saying 5, not 10, and he said it with the tone of a man making a generous concession. Emily used 3. She didn't go to the cage right away. She pulled up a rolling stool and sat down about 6 feet back from it, outside the animal's immediate zone, and she just existed there for a minute, not watching the dog directly, not making eye contact, just being present, low, non-threatening, in its peripheral awareness. The dog watched her. It didn't hit the cage again. Around the 1-minute mark, its breathing slowed. Not much, but measurably. The rigid set of its shoulders dropped by a fraction. Dale Pruitt watched this from a distance with an expression of deep suspicion. Elliot, the resident, had moved to stand near the door to the hallway, which gave him an exit route and also a good sight line, which told Emily something about his actual level of confidence in Holt's decision-making. 2 nurses had stayed. Maggie Rourke, who'd been in the ER for 11 years and had a gift for recognizing when something unusual was worth watching, and a younger woman named Sophie who was primarily staying because Maggie was. At the 2-minute mark, Emily spoke. She didn't speak to the dog at first. She spoke quietly, almost to herself, in a tone that was low and even and not quite conversational. Just sound. Just a human voice calibrated to be neither a threat nor a demand. The dog's ear flicked. At 2 minutes 45 seconds, Emily said a word. It wasn't English. It was a hand signal coupled with a verbal command, a specific NATO standard working dog command used by military K-9 units, a phrase that had no civilian equivalent and was not something you learned from a YouTube video about dog training. The hand position was precise. Right hand, open palm facing down, held at waist height, small downward press. The effect was immediate. The dog stopped moving entirely. Its chin dropped. Its entire posture restructured itself from defensive aggression into something that looked, unmistakably, like a soldier at attention. It sat, perfectly still, eyes forward. The emergency bay went so quiet that Emily could hear the ventilation system above the ceiling tiles. She heard Maggie Rourke exhale slowly from across the room. She heard Elliot say under his breath, "What the?" She heard Holt say nothing. Emily stood up from the stool. She walked to the cage, not rushing, not hesitating, and crouched in front of it. The dog looked at her. Its pale eyes were clear. Whatever storm had been running through it for the last 40 minutes had gone somewhere quieter. "Hey," she said softly. I know. She reached 2 fingers through the cage door. The dog leaned forward and pressed its nose against them. For a while, nobody spoke. Then Holt's voice came from somewhere behind her. "Carter." She didn't look up. "Yeah." "What was that?" It wasn't really a question. She could hear that. She straightened up and turned around. The room was looking at her. Pruitt, the nurses, the officer, Elliot, Holt. All of them with variations on the same expression, something between impressed and unsettled, like they'd just watched a person stick their hand into a running engine and have it come back attached. "That was a military K-9 command," she said. More silence. "He's trained," she continued. "Full working dog protocol. Whatever this animal has been through, and I think it's been a lot, his training is still intact. That doesn't happen with a dog that's just been abused in a fighting ring. That's years of specialized conditioning." She looked at the cage, then back at Holt. Somebody trained this dog. Professionally. And somebody sent him here without documentation, and the person who dropped him off left and never came back. She paused. "I want to know who that was." "That's a matter for animal control and the police," Holt said. "Maybe." She looked at him steadily. "But I think there's more to it than that." Holt's jaw moved. He was recalibrating. She could see it. Not toward her position, not yet, but toward a more cautious version of his own. Even if what you're saying is true, even if this animal has some kind of training background, that doesn't change the situation we're dealing with right now. We have an aggressive, unidentified animal in the emergency department. He's not aggressive right now. They both looked at the cage. The dog was lying down, head up, alert, watching the room, but lying down, calm. "This is temporary," Holt said. "Maybe, but it's enough to do this right instead of fast." She folded her arms. "I'm asking for a hold on the euthanasia order. Enough time to get someone who knows military working animals in here, or at least to make a call to the nearest K-9 unit and have someone come look at him. If I'm wrong, you lose a couple hours. If I'm right..." She stopped. "You don't want to be the hospital that destroyed someone's dog without asking a question first." That landed. She could see it land. Holt looked at the cage. He looked at the dog. He looked at the scar on its rear leg that he hadn't noticed until she pointed it out. "One call," he said finally. "You make one call. If it goes nowhere, we do this my way." "That's fair," she said. He walked away. Pruitt followed him, muttering something Emily chose not to hear. Elliot caught her eye as he passed and gave her the kind of nod that young residents give when they agree with someone but don't have the standing to say so out loud. Maggie Rourke stayed. She came and stood beside Emily and looked at the dog. "Military command," she said quietly. "How do you know a military K-9 command?" Emily didn't answer immediately. "I worked with some K-9 teams," she said. "Before this." Maggie looked at her sideways. "Before this, as in before this hospital, or before this career?" Emily looked back at the cage. The dog was watching her, still, patient, waiting. "Before most things," she said. The call she made went to a contact she hadn't dialed in over 2 years, a number that rang through to a Department of Defense liaison office that officially handled coordination of military assets in civilian environments. The person who answered the phone was a woman named Major Diane Rutgers, and when Emily gave her name and unit designation, a set of numbers she hadn't said out loud since her discharge paperwork, there was a pause on the line. "Carter," Major Rutgers said. "It's been a while." "Yes, ma'am. I have a situation and I need a K-9 identification consultation. In person, if possible." Another pause. "Where are you?" "Northridge Medical Center, Blackwater City." "What kind of animal are we talking about?" "Belgian Malinois, adult male, approximately 80 to 85 pounds. Old surgical scar on the right rear quarter, looks like field work. Responds to NATO Protocol K-9 commands." She kept her voice level. "Responds accurately, not a guess." Silence on the line. Longer this time. "What's his condition?" "Physically, stressed, some abrasions, underfed by the look of him. Nothing immediately life-threatening that I can see from this distance. Behaviorally," she glanced at the cage, "he's calmed down. He's stable. Is the animal in danger right now?" "There was a euthanasia order. I've bought a temporary hold, but I need someone with authority here, Major, or that hold doesn't last." Major Rutgers said something Emily couldn't hear to someone else in the room. Then, "Give me the address. I'm going to make some calls." "How long?" "A few hours, maybe less." A beat. "Carter, if this animal is what you think it might be, you need to make sure nobody touches him. Nobody sedates him, nobody moves him, nobody does anything until I get there, or send someone." "Understood." "And Carter?" "Ma'am?" "Good catch." Emily hung up. She stood in the hallway for a moment, holding her phone, thinking about the last time anyone from that world had said those words to her. Then she went back to the cage. The dog looked up when she came around the corner. His tail moved, not a wag exactly, something smaller, a recognition. "Okay," she said quietly, crouching in front of the door. "Somebody's coming. Just hang on." The problem with buying time in an emergency department is that the department doesn't stop moving around you. In the next hour, Northridge's ER received a construction worker with a fractured wrist, a teenager with a severe allergic reaction, 2 chest pains, and a woman in her 70s who had passed out in a parking lot 3 blocks away. The bay with the dog in it was cordoned off, a fact that Holt communicated to the floor with an expression that made clear he was extending patience he did not feel. He also, twice, sought Emily out to remind her that the clock was running. The second time, he brought someone with him, Dr. Patricia Soames, the hospital's administrative director, who had the posture of someone who had learned to make decisions quickly and had stopped questioning that instinct. "Carter," Soames said. She didn't offer a hand. "Dr. Holt has briefed me." "I figured." "You've contacted a Department of Defense liaison about a dog in our emergency bay." "I've contacted a K-9 identification specialist who happens to work through a DOD office, yes." Soames looked at her. "You understand how that sounds?" "I understand how it sounds. I also understand what I saw in that cage." Emily kept her voice even. "I'm not asking for much, Dr. Soames. A few hours. If the consultation comes back with nothing, you lose an afternoon. If it comes back with something, what do you think it's going to come back with?" Emily hesitated. In that hesitation, just the fraction of a second it lasted, Soames caught something. She was sharp enough to see it. "Carter," she said more quietly, "what do you actually think is going on here?" "I think that dog was military, that Emily said. I think he was trained by people who knew exactly what they were doing, and I think whoever brought him to this hospital and left him here did not do it by accident and did not do it out of kindness. She looked toward the bay. I think there's something wrong about all of it. The contractor who left him, the lack of documentation, the condition of the animal. Something's wrong. Soames was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Your file says you served 4 years in medical support roles. Overseas. That's correct. It says you received a commendation for fieldwork in... She paused like she was recalling rather than reading. In a location I don't need to name out loud. In a pretty bad situation. Emily said nothing. It doesn't say what unit. No, Emily said. It wouldn't. Another silence. Soames and Holt exchanged a look that Emily couldn't fully read. Something negotiated, something that had been going back and forth between them before they came to find her. 2 hours, Soames said finally. We hold the order for 2 hours. After that, if there's no contact from your... She paused on the word specialist. We proceed with removal. 2 hours is enough. Soames turned to leave, then stopped. Carter, for what it's worth, what you did in that bay earlier, with the animal. She didn't finish the sentence, but the almost compliment was there, imprecise and uncomfortable, like something she hadn't entirely meant to say. She walked away. Holt gave Emily a look that was either grudging respect or annoyance dressed in neutral. She'd never been great at reading him, and followed. Emily went back to the dog. She pulled up her stool. She sat. The animal looked at her from inside the cage. Still, patient, waiting with the kind of steadiness that wasn't peace. That was training. That was a dog who had learned at some point that waiting was what you did when there was nothing else you could do. She recognized it. She'd felt it herself. That specific quality of sitting still in a bad place and trusting that something would change. 73 minutes, she told him quietly. Then we need good news. The dog put its chin on its paws. Outside in the hallway, Maggie Rourke was telling Elliot something in a low voice, and Elliot was listening with the expression of someone who had revised their understanding of something important. 2 of the day shift nurses were lingering near the bay entrance with the barely disguised curiosity of people who had just witnessed something they hadn't figured out yet. Emily's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. No area code she could place. 4 words. We're 40 minutes out. And then a second message from the same number, 1 minute later. Don't let anyone touch him. This is bigger than you know. Emily read it twice. She looked at the cage. The dog was watching her with those pale, clear eyes. Her stomach went cold in a specific way. Not fear. Something older than fear. The feeling of standing at the edge of a situation that was much larger than it had appeared from the outside looking in. She set her phone down and settled on the stool and made herself breathe evenly. 40 minutes. Whatever was on the other side of that, whatever bigger than you know meant, whatever this animal had survived, whatever the man who had left him here and vanished into the parking lot was connected to, it was 40 minutes away. She had kept the dog alive this long on instinct and an 8-year-old military command. She just had to hold the line a little longer. The 40 minutes became 38, and then 20, and then the sound of vehicles in the ambulance bay changed. Not the usual pull and park of an EMT rig, but something heavier, deliberate, the specific rumble of military-grade transport that Emily recognized before she even looked up. She heard Dale Pruitt's radio crackle. She heard him say, "What the?" and stop himself. Then she heard boots. Not the soft-soled shuffle of hospital staff. Hard soles, fast cadence, 2 sets coming through the ER entrance with the kind of momentum that parted people automatically. Emily stood up from her stool and turned toward the hallway entrance just as the first figure came through the bay door. The man was mid-40s, compact, in civilian clothes that fit like they were apologizing for not being a uniform. He had a laminated badge clipped to his jacket that Emily clocked without reading. She knew the format by shape alone. Behind him was a younger woman in a gray polo shirt carrying a hard case equipment bag, moving with the focused efficiency of someone who had been briefed in the vehicle on the way over. The man looked at Emily first. "Carter?" "Yeah." Agent Warren Stiles, Department of Defense Inspector General's office. He didn't extend a hand, neither did she. You made a call to Major Rutgers. I did. He looked past her at the cage. The dog tracked him immediately. Not aggressive, but locked on, the kind of focused attention that was its own form of communication. Stiles went still. Emily watched him look at the dog the way she had looked at it, not as a threat to manage, but as something to read. She watched his jaw shift, watched something move through his expression that he controlled quickly, but not quite fast enough. How long has he been down? Stiles asked. Calm like this? About 90 minutes. He responded to command about 2 hours ago. Which command? She told him. He looked at her. A real look, not the reflexive assessment he'd been running since he walked in. Where'd you learn that? 18th Medical Brigade, embedded with a JSOC element. 2 rotations. He absorbed that. Behind him, the woman with the equipment bag was already crouching, opening the case, pulling out a handheld scanner and what looked like a modified veterinary tablet. We're going to need to scan him, Stiles said. Secondary microchip registry. Military animals get a second chip, embedded deeper. Civilian scanners don't pick it up. I know, Emily said. That's why I called. He looked at her again, then he nodded, once, and stepped aside to let his colleague work. Dr. Patricia Soames arrived 4 minutes later, with Dr. Holt half a step behind her. Emily heard them before she saw them. Soames's heels on the linoleum were a specific sound, and she turned to watch the moment they registered what was happening in Bay 4. Soames took in Stiles's badge. She took in the equipment case. She took in the scanner the woman was slowly positioning outside the cage door, and the way the dog was watching the process with the focused patience of an animal that had been scanned before. Dr. Soames, Emily said. Who are these people? Soames asked, not unkindly, but with the directness of someone who managed liability for a living. Department of Defense Inspector General, Stiles said, before Emily could answer. He showed Soames his badge in the efficient, practiced way of someone who showed it often. We're here on a K-9 identification matter. Your ER nurse contacted us appropriately. We appreciate the hospital's cooperation. Holt made a sound, not quite a word. Soames looked at Emily. The look wasn't angry exactly. It was the look of a person recalibrating, rapidly, behind neutral eyes, the story they'd been telling themselves about the situation. How much longer do you need, Nat? Soames asked Stiles. Depends what we find, he said. The scanner chirped. Everyone in the room went quiet. The woman with the equipment bag looked at her screen. Her expression didn't change, but she stopped moving for a moment, a full second of stillness. And then she looked up at Stiles. She said, We have a hit. Stiles crossed the room in 4 steps and looked at the screen. Emily stayed where she was. She made herself stay where she was, even though every part of her wanted to close the distance and read over his shoulder. She watched his face instead. He was good at it, the controlled expression thing, but not good enough for someone who'd spent years reading the body language of people operating under pressure in tight spaces. She saw the moment the information registered. His chin moved. A small tension in the muscles around his eyes. He straightened up. He looked at the dog. His name is Ghost, Stiles said quietly. Not to the room. More to himself or to the animal. Military Working Dog, 75th Special Operations Support Group. Officially listed as missing in action during an overseas operation. Classified. Approximately 4 years ago. He stopped. Seemed to choose his next words. He was never recovered. The bay was completely silent. Emily's mind moved quickly through what that meant. 4 years, missing, now here, in a cage in Blackwater City, brought by a private security contractor who left without a trace. She felt the shape of the thing before she understood all the details of it, and the shape was ugly. Missing in action, Holt said. He said it slowly, like he was trying the words out. That's a military designation. For an animal. Military working dogs hold official rank, Stiles said. He turned to face the room. Ghost was a staff sergeant. 4 confirmed deployments, 2 commendations. He paused. He was listed as KIA for administrative purposes, after 18 months of failed recovery attempts. His handler requested a formal investigation twice. Both requests were denied. Denied by who? Emily asked. Stiles looked at her. That's what we're going to find out. He pulled out his phone and made a call that lasted 45 seconds, said 6 words of substance during it, and ended it. Then he looked at Soames. Dr. Soames, I need to ask that nobody move this animal, sedate this animal, or make any decisions regarding this animal without clearing it through my office. I'm going to need to make a few calls, and I may need to bring additional personnel on site within the next few hours. This is an emergency department, Soames said carefully, not a DOD holding facility. I understand that, and I appreciate your patience. He said it professionally, without warmth, which was its own kind of pressure. This won't take longer than it needs to. Soames looked at the dog. She looked at Emily. Something moved through her expression that Emily couldn't name. Not guilt, not quite, but something adjacent to it. Fine, Soames said. Carter, you're on modified assignment for the rest of your shift. Stay with the animal. She started to walk away, then stopped. For what it's worth, you were right to make the call. She left. Holt lingered for a moment. Carter? I'm good, Dr. Holt, Emily said. Not coldly, just closed. He left. Out. For a while it was just Emily and Stiles and his colleague, whose name turned out to be Specialist Yara Okafor, a veterinary technician attached to the IG's K9 division. And the dog. Okafor worked carefully, methodically, gathering a non-invasive health assessment through the cage. Weight estimate, coat condition, visible injuries, hydration status. She narrated what she found in the quiet, precise way of someone trained to document as she went. Old lacerations, healed. Looks like bite wounds, but patterned, not random. Stress scarring on the muzzle, consistent with prolonged muzzle restraint. She paused over the rear leg. This surgical scar. Shrapnel removal, my guess. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. She looked up at Emily. You caught this from across the room. I was looking for it, Emily said. How'd you know to look? Emily considered the question. The way he was moving. Even in full threat display, he was favoring his right side, not dramatically, but enough. A scared dog doesn't compensate like that. That's conditioning. He's been managing that leg for a long time. Okafor nodded, made a note. Stiles was on the phone again, near the bay entrance, speaking in the low-register tone of a man having a conversation that mattered. Emily caught fragments. Confirmed. 4 years, contractor. And then, sharply, who signed the disposal order? She filed that away. Ghost. She was thinking of him by name now because it made her calmer and she suspected it mattered. Had settled into a state of watchful rest. He tracked Okafor's movements, cataloged Stiles, returned frequently to Emily. She wasn't sure what she represented to him. Safety was too simple a word. Maybe just consistency. She was the thing that had been present and steady since the beginning. And he had learned, wherever he'd been, that consistency was the closest thing to trust you could reasonably expect. She understood that. She'd lived by the same principle for most of her adult life. He's dehydrated, Okafor said, and underfed. Not severely. Whoever had him recently was keeping him functional, but this isn't a well dog. She sat back on her heels. He's been through a lot. Can you tell how long he's been out of official military care? Okafor's expression shifted. Not pity, but something careful. Based on the scar tissue and some of the secondary stress markers? A while. Years, probably. Not continuously in the same place. She paused. Dogs like this, working dogs with his level of training, they adapt. They survive on structure even when everything else is gone. His training kept him stable. She looked at Ghost. But you can see it. There's a kind of exhaustion that goes bone deep. Emily looked at him. She could see it. It sat behind his eyes like sediment, the weight of years of being alert, being ready, being compliant with commands issued by people who were not his team, in situations that bore no resemblance to what he'd been prepared for. Hey, she said quietly. Ghost's ear tipped toward her. Almost done, she told him. The problem arrived in the form of Terry Bowles. Not in person. Bowles was still nowhere to be found, a fact that Stiles's office had apparently already flagged because Blackwater City PD had a unit sitting on Bowles's facility address with nothing to show for it. The problem arrived as information, a phone call that came into the hospital's main line, routed through to Soames's office, from a lawyer named Garrison, who represented a private security and animal training company called Vantage K9 Solutions, headquartered in a business park 40 minutes outside the city. Soames found Emily at 4:47 p.m., and the set of her face told Emily that whatever she was about to say, she hadn't enjoyed hearing it. Vantage K9 Solutions is claiming ownership of the dog, Soames said. Emily went very still. Their attorney is saying the animal was legally transferred to them through a private contract with a, quote, Federal Asset Management Office 3 years ago. He's saying the transfer was documented and legal. He's saying that the hospital has no authority to hold the animal and that if we don't release him within 4 hours, they'll pursue legal action for unlawful detention of private property. Private property, Emily said flatly. That's the phrase their attorney used, yes. Ghost is a military working dog with an active MIA designation, Emily said. He's not property. He was never legally decommissioned. I know that. Stiles knows that. But their lawyer is waving paperwork, Carter, and I need to know if we have something that outweighs it before I go back to him. Emily looked toward the bay. She looked at Ghost. She thought about the phrase Federal Asset Management Office and the way it sat in the sentence like something dressed up to sound legitimate. Who signed the transfer documents, she asked. The attorney didn't say. Then that's the question, Emily said, because if that transfer was real and legal, there would be a signature from someone with authority in the military chain of command. And if there's a signature, she stopped. It either belongs to someone who had the right to sign it, in which case Stiles needs to explain how Ghost has an active MIA flag, or it belongs to someone who didn't, in which case what we're looking at isn't a contract dispute. Soames studied her. What is it? Emily met her eyes. It's a forgery, or worse, it's a cover-up that went all the way up the chain of command. The color in Soames' face didn't drain dramatically. She was too composed for that, but something shifted in her expression. The particular look of a person who had walked into a room expecting a small problem and found the floor was a lot lower than the door suggested. I need to talk to Stiles, Soames said. Yes, Emily said. You do. Well, Stiles didn't look surprised when Soames told him about Vantage K9 Solutions. He looked like someone whose suspicion had just been confirmed, which was a different thing entirely. Less shock, more grim. Vantage, he said. He said it like the word tasted bad. Yeah, that name's come up. He didn't elaborate. He pulled out his phone again. Agent Stiles, Soames said with the measured patience of a woman who is running out of it. I need to understand what my hospital is in the middle of here. Dr. Soames, I need 48 hours. I need an answer in 48 minutes. They looked at each other. This was, Emily observed, a conversation between two people who both had authority and neither of whom was going to back down, which meant the outcome was going to depend on who had the better leverage. Stiles had it. He knew it, and so did Soames. Ghost's military designation is active, he said. The MIA flag was never formally removed. That means he is, under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and Department of Defense Directive 5200.8.8, a military asset. No private contract supersedes that designation without a formal decommission order signed by a general officer. I'm going to make a call in the next 10 minutes that will confirm that order doesn't exist, because it doesn't. And when I do, Vantage K9 Solutions attorney's paperwork becomes worthless. And if someone forged it, Soames asked, then we're not talking about an animal custody dispute anymore. Soames was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, to nobody in particular, this started as a dog in my emergency department. It was never just that, Stiles said. Emily, standing near the doorway, didn't say anything. She was watching Ghost through the bay window. He was still lying down, chin on his paws, watching the middle distance with those pale, exhausted eyes. 4 years. She kept coming back to that number. 4 years of being used and moved and never recovered, while his handler filed requests that went nowhere and someone somewhere signed papers to make him disappear properly. She thought about what that required, the layers of it. Not one person making one bad decision, but a system of decisions, a sequence of cover-ups, each one requiring the cooperation of someone with authority. She thought about Terry Bowles loading Ghost into a transport cage and driving him to a hospital and walking away. She thought about why. Not to protect Ghost, not out of guilt. People who felt guilty didn't abandon animals in emergency bays and vanish into parking lots. People who felt guilty didn't lawyer up through Vantage K9 solutions 45 minutes after the drop-off. Bowles had brought Ghost here because he needed Ghost gone, not destroyed quietly at the facility, which would have been simpler, but gone in a way that looked accidental, transferred to a hospital, processed through normal channels, euthanized as an unidentified aggressive animal. No record connecting Bowles, no questions. The reason he needed that wasn't guilt. It was because someone was looking for Ghost, and if someone was getting close enough to make Terry Bowles nervous, then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Different from the one before. She answered. A man's voice, low and rough, like someone who hadn't slept in a while. Is this Emily Carter? Who's asking? My name is Sergeant First Class David Mara, retired. A pause. Ghost was my dog. Emily turned away from the bay window so Stiles couldn't read her face. She pressed the phone harder against her ear. Where are you? Parking lot, north side entrance. Another pause. She could hear him breathing, could hear road noise, the particular ambient sound of a man sitting in a vehicle trying to keep it together. I've been looking for him for 3 years. I got a tip this morning that someone was trying to get him put down. His voice caught. Just barely. Is he still alive? Emily closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. He's alive, she said. He's stable. He responded to command. The silence on the other end of the line was the kind that had a shape. Something releasing, something that had been held so long it didn't know immediately how to let go. NATO standard? Mara asked finally. Yes. Another silence. Then, very quietly, that's my boy. Emily looked at the bay. Ghost had lifted his head. He was looking at the window, looking at her, and something in his posture had shifted. Subtle, not dramatic, but she'd been watching him long enough to read the change, like he'd heard something, like the air in the room had changed. Come to the ER entrance, she said. Ask for me. Don't talk to anyone else yet. Not security, not administration. Just me. What's happening in there? Mara asked. Emily glanced at Stiles through the bay window. She glanced at the information on Okafor's tablet. She thought about Vantage K9 Solutions and the lawyer and the forged transfer papers and the name Terry Bowles and the 4 years that Ghost had spent surviving whatever had been done to him. Something a lot bigger than a lost dog, she said. She hung up. She turned. Stiles was watching her through the glass with an expression she couldn't fully read, but the shape of it said, Who was that? She walked back into the bay. There's someone in the parking lot, she said. He says his name is David Mara. He says Ghost was his dog. Stiles went very still. How did he find this location? He asked. He got a tip, this morning. Stiles looked at Okafor. Something passed between them, fast, loaded. Carter, Stiles said slowly. If Mara is here, and Vantage's lawyer just called, then someone else already knows we found Ghost. She held his gaze. I know. Which means whoever's been covering this up, they know too. He picked up his phone. And they're moving. Outside, somewhere in the distance, Emily heard the sound of a vehicle pulling into the hospital's north lot. And then, from the main entrance, she heard something else. Raised voices, and Dale Pruitt's radio going to static, and the particular quality of commotion that meant something had just gone wrong at the front doors. Emily moved fast. She went through the bay door into the hallway and turned toward the main entrance, following the noise, and what she found was Dale Pruitt with his hand out like a traffic cop and 2 men in front of him who were not listening. They were dressed like contractors, tactical pants, boots, company logo polos that said nothing useful, and the larger of the two had the particular build and the particular stillness of someone with military training who had stopped working for the military. Private sector, the kind of private sector that existed in the gray space between security consulting and things nobody wrote down. "Sir, I need you to stop right there," Pruitt was saying. "We're here to collect an animal," the larger man said. His voice was flat, practiced. "Private property. We have documentation. Nobody's collecting anything without going through administration." "Sir." Emily stepped into the space between them before she'd consciously decided to. "Who sent you?" she asked. Both men looked at her. The larger one took a half-second to categorize her. Nurse's badge, no weapon, small, and visibly downgraded the threat assessment. That was a mistake she'd seen men make before and had stopped being insulted by years ago. "This doesn't involve you, Sestitz," he said. "The animal you're here for is in my care, so it involves me." She kept her voice level. "Who sent you?" "Vantage K9 Solutions. We have a custody claim. I know, your attorney already called." She held the man's gaze. "The claim is being reviewed by a Department of Defense official who is currently on site. You're not taking that animal until he says otherwise. That's not a request." The second man, shorter, younger, uncomfortable in a way the first one wasn't, shifted his weight. The larger one just looked at Emily with the specific patience of a person who was going to do what he came to do regardless of what she said, and was allowing her to finish talking first as a courtesy. "Step aside," he said. "No." Pruitt's hand went to his radio. Behind Emily, she heard fast footsteps, Styles coming down the hallway. He'd heard it, or someone had alerted him. "Stand down!" Styles's voice carried the specific authority of someone who had a badge and wasn't shy about using it. He held it up as he moved into the entrance area. "Warren Styles, DOD Inspector General. I have jurisdiction over this animal pending verification of military designation. You do not have legal authority to remove him from this facility. If you attempt to do so, I will have both of you detained." The larger man looked at Styles the way he'd looked at Emily, measuring, categorizing. This time, the calculus took longer. "Our attorney can call my office," Styles said. "Here's the number." He produced a card and held it out. "In the meantime, you'll wait in the lobby or you'll leave. Those are your two options." A long moment. The larger man took the card. He looked at it. He looked at Styles, then at Emily, in a way that wasn't threatening exactly, but was meant to be remembered. Then both men walked to the lobby seating area and sat down. Pruitt exhaled slowly. "Want to tell me what's going on?" "Not yet," Styles said. He looked at Emily. "Mara? Where is he?" "North lot. I told him to wait." "Get him inside. Side entrance, not main. I don't want those two seeing him before I'm ready." He was already moving, already on his phone. "And Carter, does Ghost have any visible deterioration in the last hour? Any change in status?" "He was stable when I left the bay." "Check him again, now." She went. Ghost was standing when she came back through the bay door. Not agitated, standing the way a working dog stands when it's alert and waiting. He'd heard something or sensed the shift in the building's atmosphere and responded to it the way he was trained to respond. Readiness without aggression. "Easy," Emily said. He looked at her. Sat. She crouched in front of the cage and ran a quick visual. Eyes, breathing, posture. He was stressed, which was expected, but his eyes were clear and his breathing was controlled. No signs of acute distress beyond what 4 hours in a cage in a loud hospital would produce in any high-drive dog. She was worried about the dehydration. Okafor had flagged it, and Emily had been thinking about it since. How long he'd been moving, whether whoever had him last had cut back on food and water intentionally to keep him manageable. She found Okafor near the equipment case. "Can we get him water?" "I've been thinking the same thing. I have a portable bowl in the kit. If he's taking commands from you, we can try." They did it carefully. Okafor slid the bowl through the bottom gap of the cage door, and Emily gave the command. Ghost drank. Not frantically, not the desperate gulping of a severely dehydrated animal, but steadily, working through the bowl with the focused efficiency of a dog that had learned not to waste anything. Emily watched him and felt something ease in her chest. Okafor made a note. "He's not critical. but he needs proper veterinary care within the next 24 hours. Blood panel, the leg, a full nutrition assessment. That's going to depend on what happens in the next hour. Yeah. Okafor looked toward the hallway. Who are those guys in the lobby? Vantage K9 Solutions. Okafor's expression said she recognized the name and didn't like it. She didn't elaborate, and Emily didn't push. But the reaction told her enough. Whatever Styles knew about Vantage, it wasn't just a suspicion. It was documented somewhere, in a file that had been building for a while. Command. David Mara came through the side entrance 7 minutes later, and Emily was there to meet him. She'd been trying to picture him from the sound of his voice. Rough, tired, held together by something that wasn't quite stubbornness but was close. And the man who came through the door fit that voice more precisely than people usually fit their voices. He was 42 or 43, she guessed, with the lean, worn look of someone who had been carrying significant weight for a long time and had stopped noticing it. His left hand had old scars across the knuckles. He walked with a slight hitch in his right knee that he managed well enough that most people wouldn't catch it. He stopped when he saw her badge. "Emily Carter?" he asked. "That's me." He looked at her for a moment. "You're the one who stopped them from putting him down." "Yes." He nodded once, slowly, like he was putting that information somewhere specific. "Thank you," he said. It came out simple and unvarnished, the way people say things when they mean them too much to dress them up. "He's stable," she said. "Come on." She walked him toward the bay, and she watched the moment he saw Ghost through the window. Mara stopped walking. Ghost had been sitting, watching the door, and when Mara appeared in the window's frame, the dog went completely still for a half-second, a full-body pause that was almost human in quality, the kind of stillness that preceded something significant. Then Ghost stood up, and he made a sound, not a bark, not a whine, something lower and more complicated than either, and his whole body changed. The exhausted soldier posture collapsed into something raw. His tail moved. Mara pressed his hand flat against the window glass. "Hey, buddy," he said. His voice was wrecked. "Hey, I found you." Emily looked away. She looked at the floor for a moment, giving him that because some things didn't need a witness. Styles came in 90 seconds later, and the moment shifted from reunion to business, which was necessary and also hard to watch. Mara straightened up, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and turned to face the room with the expression of a man who had practiced holding himself together in front of people he didn't know. "SFC Mara," Styles said. "I need to debrief you. Now, not later." "I know," Mara said. "You filed 2 formal requests for a ghost recovery investigation. Both denied. First one, they said the operational record was sealed. Second one," he stopped. "Second one, I got a call from someone in my chain of command who told me, off the record, to stop filing, that if I kept pushing, I'd be flagged as a problem." "Did they use those words?" "Not exactly, but the message was clear enough." Styles looked at Okafor. Some kind of confirmation passing between them. "Who made that call, Sergeant?" Mara told him a name. Emily didn't recognize it. Styles wrote it down. "How did you find out Ghost was here?" Anonymous tip. Text message this morning said there was a Belgian Malinois matching Ghost's description being brought to Northridge Medical Center in Blackwater City and that the hospital was going to put him down. He paused. "I drove 4 hours. 4 hours, Styles said. "I've been keeping tabs on Vantage K9 for 2 years. Whatever they're doing with those animals, it isn't clean. I couldn't prove it, but I kept watching." Styles set his pen down. "Why Vantage specifically?" Mara's jaw tightened. "Because one of their trainers was on site during the operation where Ghost went missing. Contractor, not military, named Terry Bowles." The name landed in the room like a dropped weight. Emily looked at Styles. Styles looked at Mara. The shape of it was clarifying, the fog of separate facts burning off to reveal the structure underneath. Bowles at the original operation, Ghost going missing, Bowles at Vantage K9, Ghost surfacing at this hospital with Bowles as the delivery driver. 4 years between those points. The question was what happened in them. "Sergeant Mara," Emily said. She'd been quiet, standing back, letting Styles run it. But she needed to ask. "During the operation, what happened? What actually happened with Ghost?" Mara looked at her. He'd been briefed on who she was. Stiles must have told him, because he answered without qualification. We were doing a site clearance. 3-man element plus Ghost. Bowles was there as a security contractor, had been embedded with us for 2 weeks, which, in retrospect, he stopped, recalibrated. Contact came from a direction we weren't expecting. We pulled back. In the confusion, Ghost's lead was cut, not broken, cut. And he didn't come out with us. He paused. By the time we could go back in, he was gone. No body, no blood trail, just gone. Cut, Emily said. Not broken. His lead was cut, Mara said, deliberately. Another silence. You told your command this? Stiles asked. First report, yes. They wrote it as equipment failure, redacted the part about the cut lead. He said it without heat, which was worse than if he'd been angry. Just the flat, tired delivery of someone who had watched the truth get managed into something smaller and more convenient, and had been living with that for years. What? Stiles made 3 calls in the next 20 minutes. Emily heard the first one. Controlled, efficient, the kind of language that moved through bureaucratic channels fast because it had been trained to. She caught the phrase criminal referral and multi-agency coordination, and then Stiles stepped further away, and she heard nothing else. The men from Vantage K9 were still in the lobby. Pruitt checked on them twice and reported back that they were on their phones and not moving. The lawyer had called Soames's office twice more. Soames was in her office with the door closed and her assistant fielding both calls with the practiced patience of someone doing exactly that. The building had a different atmosphere now. Not the controlled chaos of a busy ER, but a specific kind of tension that came from multiple things pulling in different directions at once. Emily could feel it in the staff moving past the bay, the way they looked in through the window, the way they looked at her when they passed in the hallway. Word had moved through the floor in the way that word always moved in hospitals, imprecisely, in pieces, carried by people who had half the information and filled in the rest with what seemed logical. She heard 2 versions of the story secondhand while standing at the nursing station getting water. In one version, she had subdued an attack dog barehanded. In the other, she had pulled out military credentials nobody knew she had and taken over the ER. Both were wrong. Neither was entirely wrong. Maggie Rourke appeared beside her with a cup of coffee and the expression of someone who had decided to be useful rather than curious. You holding up? Maggie asked. Yeah. Holt wants to move the morning trauma team briefing to the East Wing. He's giving you the bay for whatever this is. She paused. He said it without being asked, just wanted you to know. Emily absorbed that. Tell him thanks. He's not completely useless, Maggie said, in the tone of a woman distributing exactly the amount of credit that was warranted and not a drop more. She left. Emily went back to the bay. Mara was sitting outside the cage on a folding chair that Okafor had found somewhere, his elbows on his knees, talking to Ghost through the door in the low, continuous way that people talk to animals when they're not particularly thinking about the words, just maintaining the sound, the contact. Ghost was pressed against the inside of the cage door, close as he could get, and the exhaustion in both of them was the same shape. Emily watched for a moment and then looked away, because some things were private regardless of the space they happened in. Stiles found her in the hallway. His expression had moved from controlled urgent to something tighter. What? She asked. I've got confirmation, he said. The transfer documents Vantage's lawyer is waving around. There's a signature. A colonel in the logistics division of the 3rd Support Command, who supposedly authorized the transfer of Ghost to Vantage K9 Solutions as part of a... He made a short, disgusted sound. As part of a working animal equipment disposal protocol, 3 years ago. Equipment disposal, Emily said. Ghost was classified as excess equipment and transferred to a private contractor. He said it with the careful flatness of a man trying not to let his personal reaction interfere with his professional one. The colonel's name is on the document. I called his office. And? He retired 8 months ago, tired. But more importantly, he says he never signed that document. He's never heard of Vantage K9 Solutions. And when my office pulled his signature from his official records and compared it to the one on the transfer documents, Stiles paused. It's close, but it's not his. Emily felt the cold settle in her stomach again. The same feeling she'd had reading that text in the bay. The sense of scale expanding past what she'd expected. Someone forged a colonel's signature, she said. Someone with enough access to get the formatting right, and enough connections to make sure nobody looked twice at the paperwork. He looked at her directly. This isn't just Bowles. Bowles is the bottom of this. How far up does it go? I don't know yet, but the referral I just made goes to the FBI's Public Corruption Division in addition to military CID. This is bigger than a missing dog, Carter. There's money somewhere in this. There's a reason they wanted to move Ghost through a private contractor instead of just letting him disappear. You don't forge a colonel's signature to hide something small. Emily thought about the 4 years. She thought about Ghost being moved through illegal networks. That had been Stiles' word earlier. Trafficking, said quickly and then left alone. She thought about a Belgian Malinois with a classified history and 4 confirmed deployments being passed through the hands of people who knew exactly what they had and exploited it. Working dogs like Ghost didn't just disappear. They were highly trained, highly valuable, capable of tasks that took years to develop. If you were running security operations, private, gray market, the kind that didn't need to answer to oversight, an animal like Ghost was an asset, the kind you didn't put down, the kind you used until it was used up. She thought about the condition of his leg, the stress scarring around his muzzle, the bone-deep exhaustion in his eyes. What happens to the men in the lobby? She asked. Right now, nothing. I don't have enough yet to detain them legally, but I've got a surveillance request going and their phones are going to be a very interesting document by end of day. He looked toward the lobby. I need them to think they still have time. Every call they make right now is evidence. And Bowles? Still not at his facility address, but he made a credit card transaction 40 minutes ago at a gas station 40 miles east of the city. He's running. Stiles' mouth pressed flat. He won't get far. The second escalation came from a direction Emily hadn't anticipated, which was her own administration. Dr. Soames came out of her office at 6:14 p.m. with the expression of someone who had been losing a chess match for 2 hours and had just had the board flipped on them. She found Emily in the hallway outside the bay and closed the physical distance between them with the focused urgency of someone who had run out of buffer. The board is calling me, Soames said. Emily waited. The hospital's legal department has received a formal notice from Vantage K9's attorney that they intend to file a civil suit for obstruction of lawful property retrieval. They're naming the hospital, Dr. Holt, me. She stopped. And you. Emily felt it land, but she kept her face neutral. On what grounds? They're claiming you had no authority to intervene in the animal's care, that you made representations about military credentials that you cannot substantiate, and that your actions have exposed the hospital to significant legal liability. Soames looked at her with the exhausted candor of a woman who was done managing the conversation. The board wants me to distance the hospital from your actions. They want a statement. A statement saying what? That the hospital did not authorize your actions regarding the animal, that you acted outside your scope independently. A pause. Carter, I need you to understand. I'm not telling you I agree with this. I'm telling you what I'm being asked to do. Emily looked at her. In another version of this situation, a version with less at stake or a different kind of person, she might have felt the floor shift. The specific vertigo of an institution moving to protect itself by removing you from the equation. She'd felt it before. Different contexts, same mechanics. Do what you need to do, she said quietly. Emily, I'm not going anywhere, Emily said. Not defiantly, just factually. I'm not leaving this bay. If the board wants to make a statement, make it. But I'm not walking away from this until it's finished. Soames looked at her for a long time. Then she said something Emily didn't expect. What do you need? Emily blinked. To finish this correctly, Soames said. What do you need from me? Time, Emily said. And the lobby. Don't let those men leave. On what basis do I hold them? Tell them there's a documentation review that requires in-person verification. Tell them it's standard procedure for DOD adjacent matters. Give Stiles another hour. Soames considered it. And if they push back? Tell them your legal team is reviewing the paperwork. Emily almost managed something like a smile. That one's even true. Soames straightened. Something had settled in her. A decision made. 1 hour, she said. And Carter, the board statement can wait until morning. She turned and walked back toward her office. Emily let out a slow breath. Mochka. At 6:47 p.m., Stiles came back into the bay with the careful, contained energy of someone carrying information that had significant weight. Mara was still in his chair. Ghost was still at the door of the cage. Okafor was reviewing data on her tablet. I've got CID on the line, Stiles said, and the FBI made contact 20 minutes ago. They've been building a file on Vantage K9 Solutions for 14 months for a separate matter. Defense contract fraud. Ghost trafficking is connected to the same network. He looked at Mara. Sergeant, the name you gave me earlier, the one who told you to stop filing requests. He's in the file. Mara went still. As what? Person of interest. He's been receiving consulting payments from a shell company that traces back to Vantage's parent corporation. Stiles's voice was even. He wasn't just warning you off. He was protecting the operation. A long silence. How many dogs? Mara asked. His voice was quiet and careful, the way voices get when the person is managing something they don't want to show in a room full of people. Stiles hesitated. Ghost isn't the only animal Vantage acquired through this channel. CID is looking at 5 additional cases, possibly more. He paused. Ghost is the only one we've located alive. The weight of that settled over the room like something physical. Emily looked at Ghost. He was looking at Mara. The low afternoon light through the bay window caught the gray at his muzzle, the old scars, the evidence of time written into his coat. He'd survived all of it. The operation, the transfer, the years of being used by people who knew his value and nothing else about him. And he was still here, still responding to commands, still waiting with the stubborn patience of a soldier who hadn't received the order to stand down. Okay, Emily said quietly. Not to anyone, just to the room. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. A woman's voice, low and urgent. Is this the nurse who has Ghost? Emily frowned. Who is this? My name doesn't matter right now. I work for Vantage K9. I've been working there for 2 years and I didn't... The woman's voice broke and steadied. There's a contingency protocol. If retrieval fails, Ghost is supposed to be eliminated remotely. I'm not supposed to know about it, but I saw the order come through the system 20 minutes ago. Emily's body went cold. What does that mean, remotely? There's a handler at the facility. He has authorization to come to the hospital location as a secondary response team. He's not here to retrieve the animal. A pause. He's coming to put him down, on site if necessary. They cannot let you walk out of that building with Ghost. Emily looked at Stiles across the room. He'd read her face and was already moving. How long? Emily asked. The order went through 20 minutes ago, wherever he's coming from. The woman stopped. I don't know how far, but I had to call. I had to. Why? Emily asked. A long pause. Because I have a conscience, the woman said, and I've been pretending I don't for too long. The call ended. Emily lowered the phone and looked at Stiles. We have a problem, she said. And from somewhere outside, from the direction of the hospital's rear service entrance, the one that didn't go through the lobby, the one that wasn't being watched, she heard a door open. The service entrance was on the building's east side, past the supply corridor and the secondary medication storage, a route that anyone who'd done basic reconnaissance on the facility would know bypassed the lobby entirely. Emily knew it because she'd walked it every shift for 3 years. Whoever was coming through it knew it for a different reason. Stiles was already moving. He pulled his badge and his phone simultaneously, thumb moving across the screen with the practiced efficiency of someone initiating a protocol he'd rehearsed. Okafor, stay with the dog. Don't open the cage for anyone. He looked at Mara. You armed? Mara reached to his right hip and showed the grip of a compact sidearm beneath his jacket. Retired, but still carrying, the habit of men who'd spent years in places where the habit kept them alive. Stay in the bay, Stiles said. Last resort only. Understood. Stiles looked at Emily. You should... I'm coming, she said. He didn't argue. There wasn't time for it. They moved into the hallway together, Emily half a step behind, and she was already running the layout in her head. Service entrance came out near the linen storage corridor, which fed into the main supply hallway, which connected to either the east stairwell or the back of the ER bay area. If someone was moving fast and knew the building, they'd go for the stairwell first and come down to the bay from the upper floor. If they were moving quietly and didn't know the layout well, they'd stick to the ground level and try to navigate to the bay directly. The sound had been a door. Just a door. It might be nothing. A maintenance worker, a delivery, a staff member coming in from a smoke break through the wrong entrance. It might not be. Stiles held up a fist at the corner of the main supply hallway, and Emily stopped. He listened. She listened. Footsteps. Ground level. Moving not fast but purposeful. The specific cadence of someone trying to be quiet while still maintaining pace. Two sounds that worked against each other and produced a tell in the rhythm. One person. Stiles stepped around the corner. The man was 40 feet away, dressed in dark civilian clothing, carrying nothing visible in his hands, but with the bulk at his left hip that indicated a holstered weapon. He was mid-30s, compact, with the focused expression of someone who had been given a task and was running the execution rather than thinking about what the task meant. He saw Stiles and stopped. "Federal officer," Stiles said. His voice was flat and loud enough to carry. "Hands where I can see them. Now." The man's calculation happened in about 2 seconds. Emily watched it. The assessment of the corridor, the exit options, Stiles' badge and posture, his own position. Then the man put his hands up. Not because he was giving up, Emily thought, but because he was buying time to find a better option. "I'm here to retrieve an animal," the man said. "Private property, authorized by—" "You're in a restricted area of a medical facility without authorization," Stiles said. He was already closing the distance, moving efficiently, keeping the angle. "Turn around, hands on the wall." Emily stayed back and watched the hallway behind them. The sound of a hospital doesn't stop for anything. The ventilation, the distant intercom, the roll of equipment carts on other floors. And every sound that wasn't those sounds was information. She heard nothing behind them. One person, then. Not a team. Stiles had the man against the wall in 40 seconds, weapon removed, wrist zip-tied with a set he'd produced from his jacket. The man was talking, something about legal authority, something about vantage, something about documentation, and Stiles was not listening. "What's your name?" Stiles asked. "Harlan Bryce." "You work for Vantage K9 Solutions?" "I'm a contractor." "What were your instructions tonight, Mr. Bryce?" A pause. "Retrieve the animal." "And if retrieval wasn't possible?" Silence. "Mr. Bryce," Stiles said with the patient, dangerous calm of someone who already knew the answer and was documenting the refusal to give it, "I'm going to ask you one more time. What were your full instructions?" Bryce said nothing. Stiles looked at Emily. She looked back at him, and in the fluorescent light of the supply corridor between the stacked linen carts and the medication shelves, something moved through the space between them. Not triumph, not relief, something harder than either. The confirmation that the woman on the phone had been right, that this had been exactly what it looked like, that Ghost had been 12 minutes away from something that had no paperwork. "We're done here," Stiles said. He walked Bryce back toward the main hallway, and Emily followed. And when they came around the corner, Dale Pruitt was there with 2 hospital security officers who had apparently been summoned by whatever alert Stiles had triggered from his phone. "Hold him," Stiles said. "BCPD is on the way." Pruitt looked at Bryce. He looked at Stiles' badge. He looked at Emily. "Somebody want to tell me to later," Emily said. "What about the lobby?" Pruitt's expression shifted. The 2 men who were sitting there. They left. About 4 minutes ago, fast, like someone warned them. Emily looked at Stiles. "Bryce had a phone," Stiles said. He'd already taken it. He looked at the screen, locked, but the last notification visible through the lock screen was a text received 11 minutes ago. 2 words visible in the preview: "Get out." Someone had warned the men in the lobby the moment Bryce was detained, which meant someone in this building or monitoring this building had known the moment things went wrong. "Run the parking lot cameras," Stiles said to Pruitt. "I want plates on every vehicle that left in the last 10 minutes. Pruitt was already on his radio. Emily went back to the bay. Ghost was pressed against the cage door, and Mara was in his chair with his hand at his hip, alert, watching the door. Okafor had moved to the side of the cage and was doing something with her tablet that involved taking photographs of the identification data on her scanner screen. "It's handled," Emily said. She heard the inadequacy of those two words and let them stand anyway because she didn't have better ones at the moment. Mara's hand came away from his hip. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "Who was it?" "Contractor named Bryce. BCPD is coming." She looked at Ghost. "We need to talk about what happens next." "I want him out of that cage," Mara said. His voice was steady, but the want underneath it was bone deep. "I know, but right now the safest place for him is in that cage in this room with people who know what they're doing." She looked at him directly. "Can you hold on a little longer?" He didn't like it. She could see that, but he nodded. Okafor looked up from her tablet. "I've completed my primary assessment. Ghost's official military record, what I can access, shows his last verified location as an overseas operational site. MIA classification entered approximately 47 months ago." She paused. "The gap in his record from that point until now is going to require a full investigation to map. But based on secondary indicators, the wear patterns on his coat, the healed injuries, the nutritional profile, he was moved through multiple facilities in that period, at least 4 or 5 different environments, probably more." She said it factually, the way that medical professionals deliver difficult information, and it landed the same way. Mara stared at the cage. Ghost looked back at him. "He's been protecting himself," Emily said. She wasn't sure why she said it, but it was what she'd been thinking since the beginning, that the aggression in the cage hadn't been damage, hadn't been loss of training, hadn't been the wild behavior of a broken animal. It had been a soldier at his perimeter, holding the line the only way available to him. Everything he did in this room today, the display, the aggression, responding to command, that's not a dog that fell apart. That's a dog that held it together. Mara didn't say anything, but his jaw moved. BCPD arrived at 7:22 p.m. with 2 officers and a detective named Samuels, who had the look of someone who'd gotten the call and said yes before fully understanding what he was walking into. He spent 8 minutes with Stiles, 3 minutes reviewing Bryce's phone, which Stiles had gotten unlocked through a method Emily chose not to ask about, and 2 minutes looking at Ghost through the bay window before his expression went from professional neutral to something considerably less composed. "The dog is active military?" he asked. "Active MIA designation," Stiles said, which is effectively the same thing. "And the men from the lobby at 1 plate confirmed," Pruitt said, coming back from the monitoring station. He handed a printed still from the parking lot camera to Samuels. "Registered to a leasing company. I ran it. The leasing company's address is a mail drop in a business park outside the city." "Same business park as Vantage K9 Solutions," Stiles said. He hadn't looked at the image. He already knew. Samuels took that in. "What exactly do you need from my department tonight?" "Right now. Secure the perimeter. I don't want anyone else coming through that service entrance, and I don't want anyone leaving who shouldn't." Stiles looked at him. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to have federal investigators in your city working what is going to become a very significant case. Tonight, I just need the building secure." Samuels nodded. He was a practical man. Emily recognized the type. Not exciting, not ambitious in the showy way, but solid. The kind of detective who kept their mouth shut and did the work. She liked him immediately. She also noticed that Stiles had not mentioned the forgery or the colonel's name or the FBI's 14-month file on Vantage K9. He was managing the information carefully, giving the BCPD enough to be useful without giving them enough to complicate the federal case. It was a delicate balance, and he was running it well. She filed that observation away and didn't comment on it. At 7:51 p.m., Stiles' phone rang. He stepped out of the bay and took it. The call lasted 9 minutes, the longest 9 minutes of Emily's evening, during which she sat on her stool next to Ghost's cage and listened to the particular quality of silence that descends on a space after a lot of noise and means either that things are getting better or that they are about to get significantly worse. Mara sat across from her. They didn't speak. There wasn't anything obvious to say. When Stiles came back in, he looked different. Not relief. That would come later, if it came at all. But something had shifted in him, a loosening of the specific tension that comes from managing a situation without full authority. He had full authority now, or something close enough to it. The FBI's Public Corruption Division has opened a formal investigation, effective immediately, in conjunction with military CID, he said. Ghost status is officially reclassified from MIA to recovered. He's under federal protective custody pending the investigation. He looked at Mara. The IG's office is requesting that you remain available for an extended debrief, starting tomorrow. I'm not going anywhere, Mara said. Stiles nodded. Then he looked at Emily. The name Vantage K9's lawyer gave as the authorizing official on Ghost's transfer, the colonel, whose signature was forged, has been contacted by CID and has agreed to provide a formal statement. He also provided the name of the person who actually processed the transfer paperwork on the military side. Who was it? Emily asked. A warrant officer named Del Rey. He processed it as routine paperwork, he says, on the instruction of his superior, who was the same person who told Mara to stop filing requests. Stiles paused. He's been arrested 2 hours ago, at his home in Virginia. The room went quiet. And Bowles? Emily asked. Detained at a fuel station 63 miles east of the city at 7:14 p.m. He was driving without a destination, just running. He had 2 phones, a significant amount of cash, and a set of documents that, according to the agents who pulled him over, amounted to a fairly complete picture of the operation he was trying to get ahead of. Stiles's expression didn't quite reach satisfaction, but it was in the vicinity. He's talking. He started talking before they finished reading him his rights. Of course he was. Emily had seen enough pressure-tested men discover the limits of their loyalty when the walls came in. Bowles wasn't a true believer. He was a contractor. Contractors ran calculations, and the calculation right now was not in Vantage's favor. The men from the lobby? She asked. One was picked up at a gas station off the interstate 20 minutes ago. The other... Stiles paused. We're working on it. Not perfect. She hadn't expected perfect. Chad. The night moved forward the way significant nights do, not in clean chapters, but in overlapping waves of information and logistics, each one requiring decisions that fed into the next. Emily stayed. She hadn't been asked to, and she hadn't been told not to, and so she stayed. At some point, Maggie Rourke brought food from the cafeteria, a wrapped sandwich and a cup of something that claimed to be soup, and set it next to Emily on the nursing station counter without comment. Emily ate it without tasting it because her body needed fuel and her mind was elsewhere. Dr. Holt appeared at 9:15 p.m. in the hallway outside the bay. He stood there for a moment looking through the window at Ghost, at Mara in his chair, at Okafor still working. Then he looked at Emily. "How are you doing?" he asked. It was a genuine question. She could tell the difference. "I'm okay," she said. He nodded. The board statement. He stopped, started again. Soames told me about it, what they were going to do. He looked at the window. I want you to know I wouldn't have signed off on that. Emily looked at him. She'd worked beside Marcus Holt for 3 years, and she knew his flaws with the specificity that came from proximity. The quick impatience, the tendency to turn professional distance into personal dismissiveness, the habit of filling silence with authority when uncertainty would have served him better. She knew them, and they were real. She also knew, because she was fair, that he was standing in a hallway at 9 p.m. having a conversation he didn't have to have. I know, she said. He shifted his weight. That command you used, the K9 command. I looked it up after. The hand signal. Yeah? I couldn't find it. He looked at her with something that was part curiosity and part the humility of a man who had encountered a gap in his knowledge that he hadn't known was there. Where does it come from? Special Operations K9 Protocol, she said. JSOC units. It's not publicly documented. You knew it from your service. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, then, I should have listened to you earlier when you said it wasn't aggression. It was not a small thing for Marcus Holt to say that. Emily recognized it as such without overstating it. You listened when it mattered, she said. You gave me the time. He nodded once and walked away, and Emily stood with her sandwich and her terrible soup and watched Ghost through the window, and Ghost watched her back. The second major development came at 11:30 p.m., and it came in the form of a name. Stiles found her at the nursing station and pulled up a chair, which was the first time he'd sat down in her presence all evening. The act of sitting told her something before he said a word. The FBI's public corruption file on Vantage K9, the one they've been building for 14 months, he said. The primary target of that investigation isn't Terry Bowles. Bowles was always a peripheral figure, a contractor doing contract work. The target is the company's parent corporation, which operates under 3 different names depending on which government they're contracting with. He looked at the counter. The founder and CEO of that parent corporation is a man named Arthur Pren. Emily didn't recognize the name. Pren is 62 years old. He started Vantage K9 as a legitimate working dog training operation 12 years ago. He had government contracts, military contracts, good standing. At some point, the FBI's best estimate is about 7 years ago, the legitimate operation became a front for a broader defense contract fraud network. They were billing for training services never rendered, equipment never delivered, and he stopped. They were billing for the acquisition of military working dogs as training assets, dogs that were acquired through the same channel as Ghost. MIA, designations that were manufactured or exploited. Emily stared at him. They manufactured MIA designations? Not always. Sometimes they found genuinely lost animals. Operational chaos produces missing animals, and those gaps are real. They exploited those gaps. Other times, according to what Bowles is saying right now in a federal holding room, other times they created the gaps. He let that sit for a moment. The operation where Ghost went missing, Bowles cut the lead. She'd known it was coming. Mara had said it. The lead was cut. And the logic had been there since then, waiting to be confirmed. But hearing it stated plainly was different from logic. He cut it on purpose, Emily said. On Pren's instruction, Ghost was flagged before the deployment. The plan was in place. The confusion of a contact engagement gave Bowles his window. Stiles looked at his hands briefly and then back at her. Ghost didn't get lost. He was taken. Emily sat with that for a moment. She thought about Mara filing his requests. She thought about the chain of command contact telling him to stop. She thought about the warrant officer processing the forged transfer as routine paperwork. All of those people hadn't been peripheral to the crime. They'd been components of a machine that required each of them to do their small part and ask no further questions. "Where's Pren?" she asked. "That," Stiles said, "is the problem." He pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. A man, mid-60s, photographed from some distance in what appeared to be an outdoor setting. Well-dressed, silver-haired, the comfortable posture of someone accustomed to being comfortable. This was taken outside Pren's home in Aldercrest, Maryland at 9 p.m. this evening, Stiles said. At 9:47 p.m., surveillance lost him. He left through a rear property access in a vehicle registered to a family member. He locked the phone. He knew the investigation was opening tonight. Someone told him. Who? We don't know yet. The information security breach is being investigated simultaneously. But Pren is currently not at his home, not at any of his registered business addresses, and not at the 3 travel hub locations we flagged. He looked at her directly. He's running. Like Bowles. Bowles ran in a straight line. Bowles is not a sophisticated man. Pren is... Stiles chose his word carefully. Pren is someone who has been running a multi-layered fraud operation for 7 years without being caught. He's prepared for this possibility. He paused. He has resources, probably offshore, probably documents. Emily thought about that. She thought about the machine Pren had built, the legitimate business, the government contracts, the network of contractors and corrupted officials and forged signatures. And she thought about what it meant for a man who built machines like that to have advance warning. He'll surface, she said. It wasn't optimism. It was logic. Men like that need their infrastructure. They can't run indefinitely without it. No, Stiles agreed. But it makes the next 24 hours complicated. At midnight, Okafor finished her assessment documentation and printed it remotely to Stiles's field printer. 43 pages of observations, photographs, biometric data, and chain of custody documentation establishing Ghost's identity beyond any legal challenge. She handed the bound copy to Stiles, and he held it with the particular care of someone handling evidence that was going to matter in a federal courtroom. "Is this complete?" he asked. "It's complete for a field assessment," she said. "He needs a full veterinary workup in a proper facility. The leg, especially. The old shrapnel wound has some structural impact on his gait that needs imaging. And honestly, the psychological assessment from a K9 specialist would be appropriate." She paused. "He's functional, he's resilient, but what he's been through over 4 years needs to be properly documented and treated. We'll arrange it." Stiles looked at Ghost. "We have a K9 rehabilitation unit at Joint Base Langley Eustis. They deal specifically with returned working dogs." He looked at Mara. "He'd be there." Mara absorbed that. "When?" "Tomorrow. We'll arrange transport in the morning." Stiles looked at Emily. "I need to ask something." "Go ahead." "When this goes to federal court, and it will, the chain of events that led to Ghost's identification and protection is going to matter. Your actions today, your calls, your testimony regarding Ghost's behavior, and the command response. That's going to be part of the case record." "I know," she said. "Are you prepared for that?" She looked at him steadily. "I've given testimony in difficult situations before." "Yes, I'm prepared." He nodded. "Then I'd like to formally document your involvement as a material witness to the recovery and protection of a federal asset. That protects you legally from anything Vantage or their attorneys attempt, and it ensures your role is on the record." "Fine," she said. "Whatever you need." But the collapse came publicly, and it came in pieces, the way real collapses do. Not one dramatic moment, but a sequence of events that each made the next inevitable. At 2:14 a.m., the FBI issued a press release that was understated by design, 5 sentences long, confirming that a federal investigation had been opened into defense contracting fraud and the illegal trafficking of military working animals. It named Vantage K9 Solutions. It named Arthur Pren as a subject. It did not name Ghost, because Ghost was evidence and evidence had protections. By 6 a.m., 3 national news organizations had the story. The version that moved across the morning cycle was broader than the press release. Someone had talked, possibly more than one someone, in the careful and deniable way that information moves when an investigation wants pressure applied. And the broadcast version included the detail of a military working dog recovered in a hospital emergency department after being left for destruction by a Vantage contractor. By 8 a.m., the phrase military hero was attached to Ghost's description in 6 different news crawls, and the phrase decorated combat veteran appeared in 2 of them. Emily was still in the hospital. She'd slept for 90 minutes on a break room couch and woken up with her neck at an angle that was going to hurt for 3 days. She drank bad coffee from the break room machine and watched the news on her phone with the specific emotional numbness that comes from being too close to events for too long. Her phone had 47 unread messages. She read none of them. At 8:45 a.m., Soames found her in the break room. The administrative director looked like she'd also not slept, but with better posture about it. "Carter," she said, "have you seen this morning's news?" "Some of it. The hospital is being mentioned." Soames sat down across from her. "Not badly. They're describing Northridge as the location where the dog was recovered and protected. One article described it as," she checked her phone, "an ER, where a vigilant staff member recognized what authorities had missed." Emily said nothing. "The board called this morning," Soames said, "at 7:30. She set her phone face down on the table. "They've rescinded the request for a statement distancing the hospital from your actions. I assumed they might. They'd also like me to extend their—" Soames stopped, looked like she was tasting the words before committing to them. "Their appreciation for the hospital's role in this matter." Emily looked at her. "You can tell the board," Emily said carefully, "that I appreciate the hospital's support." Soames recognized the diplomatic precision of that and accepted it with the small nod of a woman who'd spent enough time in rooms of competing interests to know when something was being handled gracefully. "Stiles is looking for you," Soames said, Something about a development overnight. The development was Arthur Pren. He'd been located at 5:40 a.m. at a regional airport 60 miles from Aldercrest, attempting to board a private charter under a passport belonging to a company employee. The employee had reported the passport missing 3 months ago. The report had been filed and forgotten in the same way that small administrative irregularities got filed and forgotten. A TSA officer had flagged the discrepancy. Not because she was looking for Arthur Pren. At 5:40 a.m., the FBI's alert had been in the system for approximately 40 minutes and hadn't fully propagated to regional security terminals. She flagged it because the photograph on the passport was a 22-year-old man, and the person presenting it was clearly 62. It was that simple. A 20-year discrepancy in a passport photograph caught by a TSA officer named Gabrielle, who had been on shift since midnight and who would later describe the moment in a statement as, "He just looked old for the picture." Pren was detained at 5:52 a.m. By 6:30, he had legal representation. By 7 o'clock, federal agents from the Public Corruption Division were at the airport. He did not talk. Unlike Bowles, unlike the warrant officer, unlike the contractor in the lobby who had agreed to a proffer agreement before his attorney arrived, Pren said nothing. He was a man who had built his survival on information management, and he had enough experience with legal proceedings to know that his silence was worth more than anything he could offer in the short term. But his silence didn't matter, because Bowles had talked, and the warrant officer had talked, and the documentation Pren had been running from was already in federal hands. The machine had been mapped. The nodes had been identified. The financial trails were being followed by forensic accountants who were, according to Stiles, exceptionally motivated by the scale of what they were finding. Stiles told Emily all of this at 9 a.m. in the Bay, where Ghost was still in his cage and Mara was still in his chair, and the morning light was coming through the window at an angle that made the whole room look more ordinary than the previous night had been. "Pren is in federal custody," Stiles said. "The investigation is now considerably larger than what I briefed you on yesterday. The defense fraud extends beyond Vantage. We're looking at 2 additional contractors, 3 government officials across 2 agencies, and financial activity in 4 countries." He paused. "That's above my pay grade. I'm handing this off to the Joint Task Force and staying on the K9 trafficking component specifically." "The other dogs," Emily said. "The 5 cases you mentioned." "4 are deceased. 1," he stopped. "1 case is active. A dog named Recon, deployed with the 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, MYA, 3 years ago. Based on what Bowles described of the operation's routing and the financial records we've accessed, Recon may still be alive and in a facility in the southeast. CID and FBI are coordinating a search." Emily absorbed that. 1 more, maybe. "What happens to Ghost now?" she asked. Stiles looked at Mara, including him in the answer. "Transport is arranged. A military veterinary team from Langley Eustis is arriving this afternoon. They'll do a formal assessment, and he'll be transported to the K9 Rehabilitation Unit tonight." He paused. "Mara, your clearance level and former unit designation are on file. The rehab unit has agreed to allow supervised visitation during Ghost's treatment period." Mara looked at the cage. Ghost looked back at him. "Yeah," Mara said quietly. "Okay." The transport team arrived at 2:30 p.m., 4 people in military working uniforms, a veterinary officer named Captain Fields, who moved around Ghost with the careful authority of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at, and a padded transport vehicle that bore no external markings but was clearly built for exactly this purpose. Captain Fields spent 40 minutes with Ghost. She was thorough and she was gentle, and she spoke to him throughout her examination in a low, steady voice that Ghost tracked with his ears while remaining still. At the end of it, she straightened up and looked at Emily. "How long were you with him?" she asked. "Since yesterday afternoon." "He's well habituated to you. That's not nothing. Dogs in his condition often don't trust quickly." She looked at Ghost, then back at Emily. "Whatever you did yesterday to de-escalate him, it probably saved his life. Not just from the euthanasia order. The stress response in a dog this trained, this conditioned, can go cardiac if it runs long enough." She paused. "You read him right." Emily looked at Ghost. He was looking at her. "I just paid attention," she said. Captain Fields made a note and moved on, and Emily was left with the particular feeling of being seen accurately by someone she'd just met, which was never quite comfortable and always mattered more than discomfort. Ghost left North Ridge Medical Center at 4:47 p.m., moving calmly beside Captain Fields on a lead that Mara had been allowed to clip himself. The transport vehicle was back to the side entrance, not the main entrance, not yet. The public moment would come later, and Ghost walked to it without resistance. At the door of the vehicle, he stopped. He turned and looked back at Emily, who was standing 20 feet away on the sidewalk with her hands in her scrubs pockets and the cold, late afternoon air pulling at her hair. He looked at her for a long moment. She held up her right hand, open palm facing down, at waist height. Small downward press. Ghost's chin dropped. His posture settled. Then he stepped into the vehicle. Emily stood on the sidewalk as the door closed. She stood there after the vehicle pulled away, in the quiet that follows significant things, and she felt the weight of the last 24 hours begin to settle into her body all at once. The exhaustion, the adrenaline debt, the particular cost of holding the line alone for a long time in a building full of people who weren't sure she should. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, a number she'd seen once before, the unknown number that had sent the first text, the one that said, "We're 40 minutes out, and this is bigger than you know." A new message. 3 words. "Thank you, Sergeant." Her old rank. The one that was not on her hospital badge, not in her North Ridge personnel file, not in any record that a civilian organization would have access to. She stared at the message. She looked up at the building in front of her. North Ridge Medical Center, Blackwater City. The place where she had spent 3 years being a good ER nurse and being exactly nothing else to most of the people who worked beside her. She looked back at the phone. A second message arrived from the same number, 5 seconds after the first. "There's something you need to know about the operation where Ghost went missing. Bowles wasn't the only one who cut a lead that day. We've been trying to tell someone for 4 years. We thought you should hear it first." Emily read it twice. The cold in her stomach was different from before. Not fear, not the anticipatory tension of threat. Something more specific. The feeling of a shape you thought you understood shifting into something larger. She was still looking at her phone when a black SUV pulled up to the curb 20 feet away, and the rear window came down, and a man she had never seen before looked at her with an expression of careful urgency and said, "Sergeant Carter, we need to talk." Emily didn't move toward the SUV. She'd spent enough time in enough situations to know that the correct response to a stranger in a vehicle telling you they needed to talk was not to walk toward the vehicle. She stayed where she was on the sidewalk, hands still in her pockets, and looked at the man in the rear window with the particular quality of stillness that was not passivity. "Who are you?" she asked. The man opened the door and got out, which was the right move. It put him on her level, in public space, visible. He was late 50s, lean, in a civilian suit that had the specific cut of someone who usually wore a uniform. He held up an identification wallet that she looked at long enough to read. Defense Intelligence Agency. Deputy Director, Special Programs. His name was Gerald Ashford. "I know about the message you just received," he said. "The last 2. I sent them." Emily studied him. "Why?" "Because what Bowles told investigators tonight is incomplete," he said. "Not because he's protecting anyone, he's not. He's saving himself. Because Bowles doesn't know the full picture. There are things about the operation where Ghost went missing that never made it into any report because the people who knew them couldn't report without exposing an asset." "What kind of asset?" Ashford looked at the building behind her, then back. "Can we sit somewhere? This is going to take time to say correctly." Emily looked at him. She looked at the SUV. 2 other people visible through the windshield, both in the front seats, both looking forward, not at her. Professional, not threatening, but not casual. "Inside," she said. "My building. Public space. You can talk there." "That's fine," he said. She took him to a family consultation room off the main corridor, a small room with chairs and a table and a box of tissues on the windowsill that had been there for 2 years and was never touched. She did not offer him coffee. She sat across the table and waited. Ashford put a thin folder on the table. He didn't open it. The operation 4 years ago was not a routine site clearance, he said. It was cover for an extraction. We had an asset, a source embedded inside a foreign procurement network that was siphoning military equipment specifications to 3 state adversaries. The site clearance was the legend. The real purpose was getting our asset out. Emily listened. Bowles was on that element because someone put him there. Someone with access to the operational planning who was also at that point working with Pren's network. We didn't know that at the time. He paused. Ghost going missing wasn't incidental to the contact that day. The contact was manufactured. It was designed to create chaos. And in the chaos, 2 things were supposed to happen. Ghost would be taken, and our asset would be compromised. Was the asset compromised? Emily asked. The asset survived, barely. Got out through a secondary route we hadn't briefed to anyone at the planning level. He looked at the folder. We spent 4 years trying to trace how the operational planning was accessed. Who gave Pren's people the window? We had suspicions. We had financial threads, but we couldn't close it without exposing the asset, who was still active in another role. And now? The asset retired 6 weeks ago. Medical reasons. As of 72 hours ago, we have authorization to use what we know. He finally opened the folder. 1 page, a name, a photograph, a set of financial records condensed into a single summary sheet. The person who gave Pren's network access to that operation was a lieutenant colonel named Raymond Carver. He was assigned to the 3rd Support Command's Planning Division. Emily looked at the photograph. She didn't recognize the face. The same command structure that processed the forged transfer paperwork, she said. Carver didn't forge it himself, but he created the conditions that made it possible. He identified Ghost as the target, gave Bowles the timing, and then ensured that the subsequent investigation requests went nowhere. Ashford looked at her. He's the person who called Mara, who told him to stop filing. Emily sat with that. The architecture of it was clarifying completely now. Not just a fraud operation exploiting gaps in the system, but a deliberate, coordinated act of sabotage with a specific military operation at its center. Ghost had not been collateral damage. Ghost had been a tool used to create a crisis and then stolen as a secondary profit. And the man who had made it possible had spent 4 years inside the Army's chain of command, telling people to look away. "Where's Carver now?" she asked. "He was arrested at his home in Fredericksburg, Virginia at 6 a.m. this morning," Ashford said, simultaneously with the warrant officer. "We coordinated with CID to ensure neither man could contact the other before both were in custody." He closed the folder and slid it across the table to her. "This is your copy. You're a material witness and you're going to be called to testify. I wanted you to understand the full scope before you walked into that." Emily looked at the folder. She looked at Ashford. "Why me first?" she asked. "Mara should hear this. He's been carrying the weight of that operation for 4 years. Mara is being briefed right now," Ashford said. "In a different room, by different people, with more operational detail than I've given you." He paused. "I came to you first because you're the one who kept Ghost alive long enough for any of this to matter. Without yesterday, without what you did in that emergency bay, Ghost would have been euthanized. Bowles would have had no reason to run. Vantage would have had time to clean their records, and Carver would still be inside the chain of command." He looked at her steadily. "You were the pivot point, Sergeant. I wanted you to know that from someone with the full picture." The word sergeant again. Her old rank from a man who had no business knowing it unless he'd gone looking. "You pulled my service record," she said. "I did." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because when Major Rutgers got your call yesterday, she flagged it upward. Your name, your unit designation, the fact that you'd identified a military working dog by behavior and command response after 3 years as a civilian nurse in an ER." He paused. "People in my line of work notice when someone's been sitting quietly in a place they're overqualified for and then demonstrates exactly why they were overqualified." He stood up. "We're going to need good people in the years ahead, Sergeant Carter. When this is finished, when you've testified and the case is closed, I'd like to have a conversation about what comes next for you, if you're interested." He left her with the folder and the box of tissues and the particular silence of a room where difficult things had been said clearly. Emily sat there for a moment. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about 3 years of being Emily Carter, ER nurse, the woman whose opinion meant nothing in a department meeting, whose combat medical experience had been noted once and never mentioned again, whose past had been a closed room she carried without anyone asking about the key. She thought about yesterday morning, before any of this, when the hardest thing she'd faced was a double shift and a difficult patient and the ordinary weight of a job she was good at in a place that had no idea how good. She thought about Ghost pressing his nose against her fingers through the cage door. She picked up the folder. She stood up. She walked out. Good. The public accounting happened in waves over the following weeks, and Emily watched most of it from a distance, the way you watch weather move across a landscape. Present, unavoidable, shaping everything, but operating on a scale that made individual observation feel small. Arthur Pren was indicted on 41 counts. Federal charges covering defense contract fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, and Ashar, the charge that the news coverage returned to most often, conspiracy to traffic military working animals. His legal team entered a not guilty plea with the specific confidence of expensive attorneys who had done this before. 3 weeks later, when the financial evidence was formally entered into the discovery record, and Pren's own accountants began cooperating with investigators, the confidence became considerably less specific. Terry Bowles pled guilty to 7 charges in exchange for a cooperation agreement. He received 12 years, with eligibility for reduction based on the value of his testimony. His facility outside Blackwater City was seized under asset forfeiture. A federal inspection of the property found records pertaining to 4 additional military working animals. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Carver, the name Emily had not recognized, the face she'd studied in a consultation room on a cold evening, was charged with conspiracy, theft of government property, obstruction of military justice, and aiding and abetting the trafficking of military assets. He faced a court-martial in addition to federal prosecution. At his arraignment, he said nothing. His photograph was on the front page of 2 newspapers the following morning, and in both of them he had the look of a man who had spent years being certain the moment he was in would never come. The warrant officer who had processed the forged transfer paperwork cooperated fully, received a reduced charge, and testified in detail about the chain of instruction that had moved from Carver to Pren's network and back. He was the thread that connected everything, and when the thread was pulled in federal court, the whole structure came down in a sequence that was neither dramatic nor quick. It was the grinding, methodical collapse of something built on concealment, exposed to documentation. Vantage K9 Solutions was formally dissolved by court order in the 2nd week. Its subsidiary companies were under examination in 4 states. The private security contracts it held with 2 government agencies were suspended pending the investigation's findings, which meant that somewhere in federal buildings in Washington, program managers who had signed those contracts were having very uncomfortable conversations with their legal departments. Harlan Bryce, the man who had come through the service entrance of Northridge Medical Center intending to reach Ghost, pled guilty to 1 count of criminal trespass and 1 count of conspiracy. He had retained counsel and tried, initially, to argue that he hadn't known the purpose of his instructions. The text message on his phone, the one that showed he'd been coordinating with the men in the lobby and had received the get-out warning, made that argument untenable. The second Vantage operative from the lobby was picked up at a regional bus station 4 days after the night at Northridge. He'd been moving carefully, using cash, but cash only works if you know where you're going, and he hadn't known where he was going because the network that would have helped him had been systematically dismantled in the time he spent running. Ghost rehabilitation took 8 weeks. Captain Field sent Emily progress updates, not because there was any protocol requiring her to, but because she was the kind of person who understood what continuity of care meant even after the patient had left your building. The first update was clinical. Weight restored, leg imaging completed, a minor structural adjustment confirmed in the right rear quarter that would affect his gait permanently, but not his quality of life. The second was less clinical. He walked into the courtyard this morning without being led, just decided he wanted to. Fields. The third update was a photograph. Ghost, in morning light, lying in grass with his chin on his paws, in the specific posture of a dog that was not waiting for anything, just resting. The exhaustion behind his eyes, The sediment Emily had seen in those pale irises on the first day was lighter, not gone. Some things don't go, but lighter. She kept the photograph on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker and the paperback with the broken spine. Mara visited the rehabilitation unit 12 times in 8 weeks. He drove 4 hours each way and didn't complain about it to anyone. On the third visit, Ghost ran to him across the courtyard. Not the trained approach, not the military greeting, just a dog running towards someone it had missed. Mara went down to one knee in the grass and had his hands buried in Ghost's coat for a long time, and Captain Fields, watching from across the yard, didn't document that part. Some things belong to the people they happened to. Emily testified in 3 separate proceedings over 6 weeks: federal grand jury, military CID formal debrief, and a preliminary hearing that was part of the Pren case's early proceedings. She gave her testimony the way she'd given everything else, accurately, without decoration, in the specific language of someone who had learned to describe events precisely because imprecision in her old line of work had consequences. The federal prosecutor on the Pren case was a woman named Delaney who had been doing this for 20 years and who told Emily, at the end of their 3rd preparation session, that she was the best prepared civilian witness I've worked with in a long time. Emily thanked her, and meant it, and noticed that being complimented on her competence still felt slightly foreign, like a language she understood but didn't speak at home. She was still working at North Ridge during this period. She kept her shifts, kept her patience, kept the rhythms of the job. Some things had changed. Holt said good morning now, which he hadn't reliably done before. The nursing staff who had watched her face down the hospital administration over a dog in a cage had developed a specific kind of respect for her that expressed itself mostly in small ways. A better shift rotation than she'd had before. A cup of coffee left at the nursing station without being asked. The particular quality of attention that people give to someone they've watched. Do something difficult and mean it. Maggie Rourke told her, one afternoon near the end of Emily's shift, "You know people talk about you differently now." "I know," Emily said. "Doesn't bother you?" Emily thought about it. "It bothers me a little that it took a Belgian Malinois in a cage." Maggie laughed. "A real one, the short kind." "Yeah," she said. "It usually takes something." Soames called Emily into her office in the 6th week. It was not an uncomfortable meeting. Soames sat behind her desk with the particular ease of someone who had made a decision before the conversation started and was comfortable with it. "The hospital board has asked me to offer you a formal appointment," Soames said. "Emergency protocol liaison for military and veteran patient care. It's a new position. You'd maintain your nursing role and add oversight responsibility for how this department handles military-adjacent cases, veterans, active duty, military working animal emergencies." She paused. "We're writing a protocol for the last category specifically. It's the first one in the state." Emily looked at her. "You'd have real authority," Soames said. "Not advisory. Actual decision-making authority within the scope." "Is this because of the publicity?" Emily asked. She needed to ask. Soames was quiet for a moment, which was its own kind of answer. "The publicity is what made the board move faster than they would have. But the position is real, and the need is real, and if we're being entirely direct with each other, which I think we are, the right person for it has been working in this ER for 3 years. She looked at Emily steadily. "Don't let the board's timing make you undervalue what we're actually offering." Emily sat with that. She thought about Ashford's offer, still open, not pressed, a conversation waiting in the future. She thought about what it would mean to stay and what it would mean to go, and whether those were actually opposite things or whether she'd spent 3 years believing they were when they weren't. "Yes," she said. Soames nodded. No excessive warmth, just confirmation. "There's one more thing," Soames said. She opened a drawer and placed an envelope on the desk. This came through the hospital's administrative address. Routed from the Department of the Army, Public Affairs Office. She pushed it across. "I haven't opened it." Emily picked it up. Inside was a letter on official military letterhead, short, formal, and clear. A citation commending Emily Carter, formerly of the 18th Medical Brigade, for actions directly contributing to the recovery of a military working dog, and the identification of a years-long criminal operation targeting military assets. The citation used her rank, the old one, sergeant, the one that wasn't on her badge, and closed with a request that she attend a formal recognition ceremony at Joint Base Langley Eustis at a date to be confirmed. She read it twice. Then she folded it along its original creases and put it back in the envelope. Soames was watching her. "Good news?" "Yeah," Emily said. "Yeah, it is." The ceremony at Langley Eustis was not large. It wasn't meant to be. It was a working installation doing working things, and the people who gathered in the courtyard outside the K9 rehabilitation unit on a Tuesday morning were there because they were supposed to be there and not because anyone had made a performance of it. Ghost was there. That was the part that mattered. He came out of the building beside Captain Fields, moving with his characteristic deliberateness, the permanent hitch in his right rear gate now so familiar that Emily only noticed it because she knew to look. He was lean and clean, and his coat had the healthy sheen of an animal properly cared for. When he saw Emily, he didn't run to her the way he'd run to Mara. He walked, directly, and stopped in front of her and looked up at her with those pale, exhausted, not quite as exhausted as before eyes. She crouched down. She put her hand on the side of his face. "Hey," she said, "look at you." He leaned into her hand. Mara was standing 6 feet away, watching, with the expression of a man who had learned to let things be what they were. He looked better than he had at the hospital. Still worn, still carrying the particular weight of years spent on a problem other people told him to abandon, but something had shifted in how he held himself. Lighter was the only word Emily had for it. Ashford was there. He stood to one side and didn't say much, which she'd come to understand was his register: present, observing, economical. A 2-star general named Morrison read the citation. Emily stood straight while he did it and felt the specific discomfort of being publicly recognized for something she would have done anyway, in private, without the citation or the ceremony or the crowd. It wasn't false modesty. She genuinely believed that the doing of the thing and the recognition of the thing were separate events, and the first one was the one that mattered. But she also understood, standing in that courtyard, with Ghost's head under her left hand in the cold morning air moving through the assembled group. That recognition mattered to other people. That a record existed now. That somewhere in a file, in a database, in the story that would be told about this case for years afterward, there was documentation of what a nurse in a Blackwater City ER had understood when everyone else in the room had missed it. That wasn't nothing. That was the difference between a thing being true and a thing being known to be true, and the second one had weight. When Morrison finished, Mara received his own recognition, a formal statement of vindication for his 4 years of requests, and a separate notation entering into Ghost's military record that the animal's MIA designation had been resolved with full recovery. That notation mattered to Mara in a way that the ceremony didn't, Emily could see. It was the paperwork that corrected the paperwork, the record setting itself right. Afterward, standing in the courtyard with cups of bad military coffee, Mara looked at her and said, "What are you going to do now?" "Stay at North Ridge," she said. "For a while, there's work to do." "And after?" She looked at him. She thought about Ashford's offer, still waiting. She thought about the years she'd spent in a hospital being good at her job and quietly invisible, and the years before that being essential to operations that couldn't be named. She thought about this thing that Ghost had done, holding his training, his discipline, his capacity to respond correctly when it mattered, through 4 years of circumstances that should have broken it. She thought about the fact that she'd done the same thing, just more quietly. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I think I'm done being easy to overlook." Mara smiled. It was a small smile, the kind worn by someone who doesn't do it often. "I don't think you were ever easy to overlook," he said. "I think people just chose not to look." Ghost pressed his side against Emily's leg. She reached down and put her hand on his back, and he held still beneath it, and the cold courtyard went on around them with all its ordinary institutional noise. And for a moment, just a moment, the whole shape of it was clear. You cannot hide competence forever. You can be quiet. You can be patient. You can move through rooms where nobody thinks to ask what you know. But the moment arrives. It always arrives. When the specific thing you are is the exact thing the situation requires, and then there is no more hiding. Not because you announce yourself, because the work announces it for you. Emily Carter had not walked into Northridge Medical Center's emergency bay with a plan. She had walked in with 4 years of combat experience, 8 years of practice at being underestimated, and the particular stubbornness of someone who had learned to trust what she observed when everyone around her had decided to trust something easier. She had seen a soldier in a cage and refused to let anyone pretend otherwise. The criminals who had built their operation on the assumption that nobody would look closely enough were in federal custody, in courtrooms, in the long, grinding process of institutions correcting their own failures. Imperfect, slow, incomplete in the ways that justice always is. Not every wound gets healed. Not every record gets corrected in time. The 4 dogs who hadn't made it back were not made whole by the prosecution of the people who had taken them. That's the part that doesn't resolve neatly, and it shouldn't, because pretending it does is its own kind of lie. But Ghost was alive. Mara had his dog back. Carver's signature on a damning set of financial records was moving through a process that would end in consequences. Pren's machine was dismantled, and in Blackwater City, in an emergency department that had spent 3 years not quite seeing the person working its hardest shifts, there was a new protocol being written by the woman whose opinion had once meant nothing. That was not everything, but it was not nothing. Emily picked up her coffee and looked at the sky over the base, pale, wide, the particular winter blue that made distances look further than they were. Ghost sat beside her with the composure of a soldier who had done his time in hard places and was, finally, somewhere that didn't require him to be afraid. "Welcome home," she said quietly. Not to him, or not only to him, to both of them. The world has always had rooms full of people certain they know what they're looking at. What changes things is the person in the corner who actually does, and who refuses to look away.